Daniela Green. I work in a company called Wix, if anyone here is not from Wix. I'm in the automation team. Recently, I've been a part of starting a project for E2E testing for Angular application. It's called the Wix Hotels. So that's where I got all my knowledge of Protractor, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about what is Protractor, the framework it uses, the framework it wraps. We're going to talk about the Selenium and the Jasmine framework which Protractor uses it for its test syntax. We're going to talk about how to use Protractor, how to install it in our project, and how to run tests with it. We're going to talk about some debugging tools who help us debug our tests. Protractor is an end-to-end framework to test our Angular application. It wraps the WebDriverJS, and it uses us to simulate all the user interaction with the browser. We can do click, we can do drag and drop, we can simulate any action the user can do with the browser. We can do it using the Protractor. So it's written by Julie Ralph. She's a lead developer in Google. She started to write this Protractor framework and released it in 2013. You can fork the project in GitHub. It's a totally public project. You can pull requests for any features you like. The reason I think this framework got to be common among automation developers and developers in general is that the documentation about the Protractor got really, you can find a lot of documentation on the web regarding it. You can see that Julie is really active. She answers feature requests. She answers any request by the user. She helps fixing bugs. And this is one of the main reasons a lot of people know a lot about Protractor. And it's really easy to use it because you can find a lot of it on the web, which this is like kind of if you would use this, you would want to use this framework, I don't know, 3 years ago, it would be a lot more difficult to use it. So let's see what Protractor uses. Let's see the framework it wraps and uses. If we could look about our system structure, we can see that Protractor is basically a wrapper on top of the WebDriverJS. It runs the Jasmine. It can also run Cucumber, Mocha. We're going to talk about and focus on Jasmine today. We can see that it interacts with a Selenium driver, which is basically our API to talk with the browser, which is our Angular application. So WebDriverJS is basically how we talk with the browser, how we simulate all the interaction, all the action that user which user does with the browser. So it's how we control it. What is the main difference between WebDriverJS and other WebDriver is that is asynchronous. So why do we focus on it and why do we care about it? Because we're talking about testing, and it's in the testing world, it's really important to assure that the last action we perform is actually done, and we can continue and execute the next action. We're going to see an example here. So if we're going to talk about Java versus JavaScript, so Java uses the WebDriver, and JavaScript in the Protractor framework uses the WebDriverJS. This piece of code refers to in the first line, we address a page. For example, we navigate to some certain page, and then what we want to do is click an element on the page. So in Java, which is a synchronous language, we're going to write this code like this. If we're using JavaScript, like Protractor, we're going to have to assure with promises that the last action was resolved, for example, driver get, and then we can execute the click after we make sure that the problem that the first action was really finished. So, of course, that we want to write our code synchronously and in a more clean way. So how do we deal with that? So the way to deal with that is the control flow that the protractor, with the control flow of the protractor mechanism. So we don't have to wait for the last action to be resolved. We don't have to wait to add some weight in our code. We have this example here to see how our protractor uses the control flow. So in this code, we can see that the first method is navigating to some URL. We have several actions in the page, and last we have some verification on some element on the page. So we uses navigating to the page, and the last couple of more steps in the test, and lastly expect with some verification. So at that point A, none of this action was executed. We can see that the get didn't execute yet, and the expect and the name getText, expect name getText wasn't executed. What the control flow does is create a queue with the promises, and it executed on the time the action was resolved. So basically, we don't know exactly when the action were executed, but we can. It assures us that the last action will happen after the last was resolved. What happens here is that there is a certain loop that track for Angular elements all the time. So it seeks for the Angular element to be rendered on the page, and only then execute the action. Is it clear? Do you have any question about it? Yeah.
So here you don't need the promises here, like the example you showed?
No. So this is the next slide. Avoid of doing this. Sorry. He asked if we don't need to use promises here. So the answer is no, because the control flow mechanism does it for us. So we're avoid of doing this, and we can write our code in a synchronous way. Okay? That's not all. So easy to catch elements in the DOM. In testing role, we need to locate elements in the DOM, and Protractor gives us a really easy way to do it. So if we look at the global variables that the Protractor exposes, we can see the element, the by, and the browser. Let's see how we use them. So for example, if I want to locate an element in DOM with the attribute, which is with the attribute ID search, so I will do element by CSS and the dash, sorry, hash, pretty close, hash search. With Protractor, I can also use some special attributes that are for Angular, for example, by model. If I have in my application this input tag with the ng model and the ng model attribute with the name my model in it, in my test, I can refer to it with element by model and my model name. This is really important. This is really important in the I would say feature. I don't want to say feature because it's all right. So it's a really important feature in that Protractor gives us, because if we use these attributes instead of class and ID, it's a really more stable way to locate our elements, and we can assure and we can trust these attributes, and it gives us stability to our test instead of using ID and class, which can change a lot during the development. Another example for this feature is the ng repeat. So for example, if I have the attribute ng repeat and the repeater name user in users in my Angular application, in my test, I can refer to it as element by repeater and user in users, and I can assure that I will get all the li elements that has this repeater name. So again, it's a really stable way to maintain our tests. browser is another global variable. I can navigate to a certain URL. I can switch between iframes by name or index, and I can apply some weights in my code. Another cool thing is that expect is adapted to promises. In the past, in order to expect to use the expect to have some verification in our code, we needed to pass it the string after the method is resolved. So here I have the getText method that returns a promise, and I need to pass the expect the actual string. So now I can expect the actual promise, and he will know to match the promise after it's resolved. So it gives us another clean way to write our code. We can also use the dollar symbol. It's equal to element by, for example, here CSS and the hash. Yeah. So again, I can use the dollar symbol, and it's a cleaner way to write our code. Any question regarding the Selenium part? All right. What are we going to talk about now? Any guess? Yeah. All right. So we're going to talk about the Jasmine framework. So Protractor uses the Jasmine framework for its test syntax. We can see in this little example the describe, the it, the expect, and the to be matcher. If we look at a certain test structure, we can see here exactly the syntax from the Jasmine supply us. We have here the before each, which we can use to have a certain preparation, a certain setup for the test. After each can use for some sort of a cleanup to our test. The it is our test, and we can have we will write here a couple of steps, and then the expectation, and so on. A real example, which can use for a refactor lecture now, but you can see that we use here the describe, the before each, the after each, the it, and expectation in our test. So these are all coming from the Jasmine syntax. All right, so now we're going to see how it really works, how we can install the Protractor in our project and use it to run tests. We're going to use the NPM, we're going to install it via the NPM, which is our dependencies for using the node. We're going to see how we install it via the NPM, which is a manager for all our dependencies. So this is an example from the NPM website, which we can install the Protractor. We have here a couple of great tutorials to use the Protractor and how we can, the command to install it in our project. So we're going to use npm install Protractor. In our root, in our project root, we're going to write npm install Protractor. We're going to see that a node model directory was created under the node models. This is an example from our project, which has the node models directory with all the node models, and we see the Protractor here. How are we going to run tests? In order to run tests, all we need is a configuration file and a spec file. Configuration file tells us where the specs location. The specs are our tests, so I can write here all the description of I can write here all the files that contains the test. I can add certain capabilities. For example, I'm going to use the Chrome browser, and I want all the console logs. So it's a basic configuration to run the test. The spec file is basically our test. And we're going to run it by the Protractor command. In our terminal, we're going to write Protractor and the name of the configuration file. For example, Protractor and then conf.js. All right. So we're going to switch to a live demo now to see how we're going to run a really basic test. So we're going to run a really simple test using the Protractor. All right, so our test is going to navigate to some Angular web app, which is an Angular application. It's basically a calculator. We're going to add 1 and 2 and expect it to be 3, hopefully. So let's see how we run a test. You don't see nothing, right? One second. All right, so now that we have the Wi-Fi on, so again, in order to run the test, we're going to hit the protractor and then the configuration file name. So our test starts. It opens the browser. You're going to see that it adds 1, 2, and the result is 3, and test passes. So we see here that the should calculate. I won't show it to you because it's too small. But I see green, and it means that the test passed, so you can be relaxed. All right. So this was a basic example to run a, yeah.
Can you in theory run it against a local host without needing to connect to the internet?
Again?
Can you run it against local host or something like this?
You want to see it more slowly?
No. Can you run it without connecting to the internet? You have like you're running a local server.
On what address to put my Selenium server? Yeah, I can configure it in my configuration file. All right. Any questions? Yeah.
Can you run the server before starting the test? For example, a Java-based server?
Again?
Can you run the server of the application before starting the test? For example, a Java-based server, in order for it to be a real.
I couldn't hear the Java what server?
It says, can you start up a Java-based server before starting the test?
Before starting the test. Good question. Sorry?
You can do it by yourself.
Yeah, the whole server is
It's
You can do it by yourself, but he's asking whether there's a built-in support for doing something like that, like a step that happens before all tests and after all tests, in which you can run some generic command line.
you can do it. You can run the server before, but you'll have to perform some cleanup in order not to start a server again or a browser again, for example. Because here the WebDriver is the instance to use the browser. Yeah, but you will have to manage your cleanup for the test. I mean, if you want some preparation.
But in the framework, it has only the for each. You see it for all tests.
You can, in the example, before the Protractor used Jasmine 1.3 version. Now Protractor can use the Jasmine 2.0, which also have the before O. Yeah?
In React.js, we have browser.sleep 5 seconds. Why? What's he doing?
Just for this, or I'm repeating the question. The question was, why did I add the sleep for 5 seconds? It's just to show you that the test passed and to show you the browser. I don't need to, it's not necessary in order for the test to pass. All right. Any other questions? All right. So, we're going to talk about Protractor with the non-Angular application. As I mentioned before, when we test Angular pages, we have a constant loop that seeks for the Angular elements in our page. So what happens if we want to test Angular application with non-Angular application? Wix is a very good example for it. We can see here a web page in Wix. And it has the hotels application, which is an iframe of an NG app page. So the entire page is not an Angular page. It doesn't contain any special ng apps. And inside the iframe, we have the Angular application. So how do we manage that? How can we switch from testing a non-Angular page with an Angular page? So how do we deal with that? We can ignore the synchronization. So in order to do that, we can add a line in our code which tells the protractor to stop seeking for the Angular elements. We're going to see here an example that uses a non-Angular page and the protractor itself. So in this test, we're going to navigate to Google. Sorry. In this example, we're going to navigate in the beginning of the test to Google, which doesn't contain, surprisingly, any Angular elements in it. Then we're going to search for "is that easy?" and going to expect that the search bar will contain the phrase "it's that easy." So if I'm going to run the test, as we mentioned, protractor and the configuration file name, the test starts. It opens the browser, it navigates to Google, and nothing happens. I'm going to wait. And we can see that the test failed. I can see a lot of red, and it says, the error says the Angular could not be found in the page and the test failed. So any suggestions on what we're going to do to pass the test? Yeah, it's fine. So we're going to add, in the beginning of the test, the browser ignores the synchronization equals true. We're going to run the test again. It opens the browser. Google, it's that easy. Whoa, what? It's that easy. I hope you didn't see what the results were. So the test passed, it's all green. And that way we can easily switch between ng apps and non-Angular and non-ng apps and still use the protractor. Best practices. We're gonna see how we can still use some best practices with the protractor framework. For example, we're gonna talk about page objects. So with page objects, we can describe in this example we see some form from our application, and we can write it a driver to for all the actions we can perform in the page. For example, setters and getters for all the fields in our form. This, I don't know who here is using the page drivers, but it's really it's a best practice because we can use this piece of code anywhere we want in our project. It's an easy, clean way to maintain our tests. In this example, we're going to see how we can require a page object. We declared our page object, our driver, as a home page. It has two methods, which is a get and set name. In our test file, we can require this home page. We're going to instantiate it with a URL as we wish. And then in our test, we can use all the methods of this page objects. Any question regarding this? I think it's pretty, yeah.
The ignore synchronization, if we want to turn it off and on, let's say we make that Google search and then the results page has Angular.
Nick asked if we can switch to using the synchronization that the protractor supplies. So the answer is yes. If we're starting with the non-Angular page and we toggle it and we toggle off the synchronization, we can switch. We can get it back, switch it back later if we're testing Angular page and write browser ignore synchronization equals false.
And it works nicely even though you're queuing tasks.
This is a disadvantage because if you're using the ignore synchronization, you don't have the ability to use the control flow. You need to manage your timing by yourself. Right?
So
Sorry?
It's one or the other.
Yeah. All right. All right, lastly, we're going to talk about some debugging tools to help debug our tests, because as we all know, they fail, unfortunately, and we want to know why they're failing. So we can use the browser pause to pause our test and explore the DOM in a way. We can use the browser debugger to put a breakpoint in our code. And finally, we can use an external tool, which is the Element Explorer.js. When I say external, it means that it doesn't come from, we don't add it in our code. We can use it to open a page that we want to explore the elements in it. I'm going to show a live example regarding the Element Explorer, and then we'll figure it out. So in order to use the Element Explorer, we need to start the WebDriver, and then we can use the Element Explorer and give it some URL which describe the page that we want to explore. The Element Explorer is in the Protractor bin, which is in our node models directory. So in this example, we're going to see how we use this debugging tool. So I'm in the bin directory of Protractor. I'm going to run the Element Explorer.js and give it the Angular homepage. And I don't remember it, so I'm going to navigate to Angular homepage. All right. So Angular homepage is an ng app, and we're gonna examine this this name input tag and this h1 and this in this element, which is bind to this name input tag, and we're gonna see how we can explore this with the Element Explorer. So after we started our WebDriver manager, we can start the Element Explorer with the Angular homepage that we gave it. So this is my page that I want to explore. This is my name input tag. We're going to see that this is binded to the your name binding with this. So let's see how I can get this hello by binding. For example, I'm going to use the element as I will use it exactly in my code. I have here the options that it brings me. For example, I'm going to use by binding because this element is by this attribute is by binding. I'm going to write the by binding name, which is your name.
Yeah, can you zoom in on the console?
You can see. I'm going to get this element. I'm going to use the element by binding, and I'm going to give it the binding name, which was your name, and going to use the method getText. And I see that I got the hello, which is here. Another example to add text is to use the by model attribute. As you see here, this input tag has the ng model your name. So I'm going to refer to it by element by model and give it the model name, which is your name. And I'm going to send keys, which is, let's say, hello world. And I have here the world type. So this is a really a cool way to explore the DOM. Some preparation for before you go and write your test. We talked about the Protractor and the framework it uses, how it uses Jasmine, and how it wraps the Selenium WebDriverJS. We talk about some advantages of using the protractor, the control flow that help us managing our time, that help us managing the timing in our project and help us not use unnecessary waits and sleeps. We saw how to install the protractor, how to use it to run tests, and some debugging tools to help us debug our code. That's it. Any questions? Yeah. Michael. Michael.
Very basic question. I see that it's working with browsers. Can it work without opening browsers, just in batch mode?
Headless?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't relate to the, this is just a framework. You can choose how to run your tests. Yeah.
In Angular pages, it waits for the page to stabilize before it runs the tests. And in non-Angular pages, it has the same process. It waits for the page to finish loading.
He asked whether, he said that when we use when we load Angular app, then the protractor waits for the page to load. So if we're not using Angular, if we're using non-Angular pages, does protractor still wait for the page to load? So the question is no, because protractor 6, he knows that the Angular page was loaded by searching for the ng-app attribute. If we are navigating to a page that doesn't contain the ng-app attribute, it doesn't have anything to seek for. So what we need to do is find our own way how we say that the page loaded. Look for a certain element to load, how we choose to. All right. Yeah.
Would you use the protractor for non-Angular?
No. No, I wouldn't. So the question was, do I recommend to use the protractor for non-Angular pages? So the question is no, because you lose you lose the control flow. You will have to stop the synchronization, and it's a really big disadvantage, because you will have to manage to wait for your elements and it. Again. Tools to any web application. It's really, it depends on what you chose to use. If you choose to use the WebDriver, which is if you choose to use any WebDriver, so it depends. Rather, I can say that from the protractor point of view, writing the project in Node.js, which is an external project, it doesn't run in the build. It triggers every 2 hours and navigate to public URLs. It helped the relationship with the developers, because we can sync. It was in the same. It was easy for them to maintain the test project also.
The reason I'm asking is because when you use protractor in Angular application, you're tightly coupled to the technology that you wrote the code with, and it's making it harder to change the mechanism of the web application.
You don't have. Oh,
for
sorry.
example, if we have part of the application in Angular and we want to move to React, we will have to rewrite our tests.
Yeah, so you don't have to use all the special attributes for the Angular. You can still use protractor without without using any special Angular elements or features. Let's call it that. You can locate elements by other attributes that are not related to Angular, but you lose a lot of the cool features and you lose a lot of advantages that protractor supplies. So I wouldn't recommend. I think that's it.